what are some of the challenges that young people in care face between school and social care?
There's this whole conflict for them going on, the social work timetable and then the education timetable.
Now, I don't think a child-focused system can happen unless, this is the unpopular opinion. Will you sign my petition?
No.
Please?
The system as we know it might not look as though it's working or it works. And I think sometimes we fall into that trap of forgetting what it did look like. It's so easy to focus on a particular group, and that being teachers in this respect, to say, you should do X, Y, and Z. But they don't create the education policies.
Welcome to Conversations That Care, the podcast brought to you by the Care Leaders. I'm Luke Rogers, and joining me is Karylle Phillips. Episode 4, School and Social Care, a Corporate Parenting Conflict.
We're going to talk about school and social care. Interesting topic. And I think it's quite interesting as this topic because of your educational background. Would you like to share a little bit about what you have studied?
I love that.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, left school, 0 qualifications. I say I left school. They asked me politely to leave.
Was it politely?
I mean, that could be up for discussion. But yeah, they asked me politely to leave. And it was fine at the time. You know, 12-year-old Karylle was just like, haven't got time to be here anyway. Hello, I've got so many more important things to do, right? Such as meeting up with my friends, sleeping in late, etc. And so then I think my first introduction back into education was an access course. I realised I wanted to go into social work. And so I had to take a different route in social work because I didn't have the qualifications to get to university. So I did an access course and then passed maths and English and all that other fun stuff. And then went to do social work, graduated as a social worker. Along the journey, long story short, realised I didn't want to do social work. I'd gone into it with the mindset of, I'm going to go into social work and be better than everybody else. Right, I'm going to be the best social worker ever.
Well, you've actually achieved that. Congratulations.
Got into it and then went, ooh, this is way different than I was expecting. In terms of, if I'm honest, I think it was just, again, it goes back to, and I know we have spoken about this on other podcasts, Luke, in terms of lived experience and its place in services and delivering improvement in terms of its importance and its value, right? Because whilst we believe it's valuable, again, I go back to the thing of what's the point of it though, if it's not to do anything different. And so with new knowledge, I learned that whilst my experiences of care were absolutely valid, they were just isolated from the systemic stuff that I went on to then learn, right? And so knew very early on, which is really interesting, that lots of people with lived experience of social work go into social work. And that's direct experience or not. But what was interesting for me on my journey was that the support for those with lived experiences in social work. And so I went into social work with the plan that I was going to work with, looked after children, not do child protection, which was very different at the time when I was doing social work because everybody, all of my peers, were all going into either child protection or adult services. And I was almost niching and I was just focused on looked after children. So all that post-care proceeding stuff, all of that in-care stuff, with a big idea that I was going into the private fostering sector in particular, wanted to work in that sector. And learnt very early on the business side of things. Anyway, after several experiences and seeing the market increase in terms of private fostering and being in all those different spaces between assessing foster carers' perspective, the training, the support they were getting, and then equally seeing the business side of things, I realised I didn't want to do that anymore. Instead, I wanted to become a teacher, but a teacher for social workers. So I went back to uni and did my PGCE, so it's a postgrad certificate in education, and then went back to the uni that I graduated with and became a lecturer. And really, so it's interesting because in one of the other podcasts you said you really enjoyed about me was my ability to explain quite complex pieces of information like legislation and so forth in a way that everyone could understand it. And that was the feedback all the while I was studying, that my the other students within my year group were constantly like, Karylle, can you explain what they've just said? And I'd have a way of being able to explain it in a way that other people understood it. So yeah, I just saw that was a skill. So I went back and did social work lecturing for a while, really loved and enjoyed that. And then went back to uni again to develop my knowledge of law.
I know, because I know you along the way has worked in widening participation.
Children's rights, widening participation, looked after children, yeah.
So anybody listening to this, what we have in front of us right now is a care experienced person that is a qualified social worker, teacher, now going into law, that can also do widening participation and youth engagement. There's the consultant that everybody needs to get in.
Don't tell me.
Right, I'm not telling you. I'm just letting people know.
Yeah.
People are looking for good quality individuals. And actually so this topic is perfect for you because this is the topic of school and social care, and what is the dynamics for young people in that space. Being someone that's got care experience, social worker, teacher, works in widening participation. You've got a breadth and a wealth of knowledge in this space. What are some of the challenges that young people in care face, between school and social care?
So many. And it's interesting, right? Because we're talking post-COVID now. So we already know about the challenges all children and young people are facing in education. One, this idea that does it even matter anymore, right? Because that's been a long-standing thing for lots of different groups of communities around, well, what's the point of it? And then COVID showed lots of people, or it affirmed for them, that, they can just guess your grades anyway. What's the point in all these exams, right? Equally, what we've also seen is a rise in knowledge and awareness of neurodiversity and special educational needs and all these other things. And all that's absolutely beautiful. But for our looked after children, one of the things that I used to always say to both social work students and then to educators was there's this whole conflict for them going on, the social work timetable and then the education timetable, right? And so being in care and in school, it's great that you want me to achieve and it's great you want to teach me about all this stuff. But before I've even entered the classroom, I've just left a house of strangers, new people I'm living with, no matter how long I've been there for, no matter how safe you perceive me to now be. I'm living with strangers. I wake up every day in a stranger's house. I don't know where my mum is. I don't know what's going on. Contacts getting cancelled left, right and centre. I can't just go and see my friends because apparently assessments need to be done and people need to be checked out and all this kind of stuff's going on. And I'm expected to sit for 6 hours and learn. And I don't want to do that because my brain is unable to concentrate on just that with all the other things that are going on in my life right now. And so, yeah, one of the key things that I always say to educators and social workers is, one, come together more. It's very rare. I don't remember on my PGCE any conversations being had about social work. And equally, whilst there was some conversations on my social work course, it wasn't heavily or it wasn't focused on understanding looked after children in education and how do we better support that process and how do we work towards, for instance, I was also a named person to look after. Go on.
Before you run into it, because I could listen to you all day, I want to just unpack a few things that have been said. So COVID is an interesting one because what I'm hearing you say is because of COVID, because of how we generally responded to COVID, it has created this mindset in young people and maybe in adults too. Oh, well, we'll guess the grades anyway, because that's what happens. We've kind of given authority to something that didn't exist before. There's obviously the rise in conversation around neurodiversity, and I'm seeing that not just in schools, but I'm seeing it in society. I'm seeing lots of people self-diagnosing themselves with neurodiversity. So that's an interesting space. But this kind of 2 times table space is something that I'd learned from you, and I kind of wanted to unpack that a bit further, because I find it interesting. So I learned that from you about, essentially, you see your parents on the weekend, if you see your parents, and then you go into school on a Monday morning with all of that baggage. Let's say you're late on a Monday morning because you were talking to your foster care about that challenge, and then the teacher shouts at you for being late. The teacher doesn't know that you're having the contact with your parents. And when I looked into it, when you look at Ofsted, or what I know from what people have communicated to me, what they're regulated on, Ofsted, or people say, Ofsted want young people to attend their reviews, for example. But Ofsted also want attendance and attainment at school. And sometimes they clash with each other. So I've got an unpopular solution. I wanted to run it past you.
Oh, God, live in action.
Yeah.
I wish you would give me notice of these things.
Never. Look, this is all part of like...
My brain. Go for it.
See what you think. So this is my theory, right? And so there's a few dynamics that this relates to. So dynamic number one, we say that the young person's view is always the most important, and we make decisions based on their view. I don't think that that's true, nor do I think it is safe that we communicate that their view is the most important, because I think that all views are important. I think that young people definitely have a space for that. And why I'm saying that is because what will happen is that young people will go into school and they'll say, I don't want the teacher to know that I'm in care. And when you ask them why, a lot of the time it's because they'll feel judged. So I feel if we just listen to their view and say, okay, we won't tell anybody, we're passively agreeing that they're going to be judged. And I'm not going to trust you anyway, because as we've spoken about in another podcast with relationships, if you've had untrusting relationships in the past, you assume they're all going to be untrusting. So what that happens then is this dynamic where... and then the second thing is this child-focused system. We say we need a child-focused system. Now, I don't think a child-focused system can happen unless, this is the unpopular opinion, we abolish social work hours. And we say to social workers, there's two rules. Rule number one, under no circumstance do you interrupt a child's education, like at all, for any commitment in social care. Under no circumstances whatsoever do you interrupt a child's education. And rule number two, you see a child at a time that suits them. Now, that could be weekends or after school. Now, that would be a child-focused system, because it's protecting the education, and it's also making sure that the young person you see them on their terms. Now, why I suggest that solution is because what happens is, because the working hours of a social worker in school overlap, and that social worker has to have so many visits, so many commitments to that child, is that there are occasions where the child has to be removed from school for a statutory visit, for a visit with a social worker, for a review, for a personal education plan, which then means that they're missing out on school, their attainment's down, they then has to go back into school with that mindset. And that dynamic, those systems clash. So I'm going to start a campaign to abolish social work hours.
Wait, what?
Yeah, and I think that social workers should never disturb a child's education and to always meet a child at a time that suits them. Will you sign my petition?
No,
please?
just so
Why? This is a child-focused system.
Just so we're super clear.
Okay.
A few little
we're going to be challenged.
problems with your campaign. One,
I don't like problems.
what happens to the children who aren't in education? Two, just for you to think
I've not
about.
thought that far ahead, to be fair.
What happens to the children whose education is not consistent? So sometimes they're in education, sometimes they're not. Equally, you abolish social work hours, you forget that there's a whole group of other people who work outside of those school hours, foster carers, residential care staff, etc., kinship carers, etc. And actually, the decision makers work in the same time as the school is not always the worst thing, so long as those people who are supporting the other areas, the other hours, can pick that up. So if you've got, and that's why I was so keen on training foster carers about understanding social work legislation, processes, school, because actually with brilliant foster carers who have the knowledge that actually that support can be in place, and actually they can advocate for the child. They can almost sometimes be in place of the child at these meetings because they're there as their full representative, right? And so almost the child doesn't need to be pulled out of education to do that. Go on.
No, because I thought what you'd done there was stopped, fired it at me, and you were like, what's your response?
Go for it, though.
Okay. I'm willing to change what I had said and
that was easy.
to adapt the campaign somewhat. I'm not back down just yet, but so what I'm hearing is the things that I enjoy saying.
Yeah.
But it's and I like this. I like what you're saying. Because what I've just heard from it is that foster carers need more power, they need more responsibility, and they need more of a voice. So it's around devolving power to foster carers and others to actually remove all of the responsibility, ownership, pressure off the social worker, which I love the idea of that. Foster carers, I'm sure, will absolutely love the idea of having more of a say. But I suppose if we're going to do that, we also need to give additional support for foster carers, additional training.
They too have a social worker, right? So we just have to be mindful here that there's also already a resource there. So foster carers have a qualified registered social worker assigned to them.
Right.
And they are what I used to call the foster carer's carer, right? They are the person that's there for the foster care. Yeah, of course, they're child focused to some degree, but they are there for the foster care. And so the two can coexist. The child has a social worker who's responsible for them, and the foster care equally. And so there are two same qualified persons operating in the one house. And so they almost shouldn't need, I'm not saying they won't need additional support and what that looks like, but there is already a qualified social worker who is there for the foster carer. And so when it comes to decision making, we're not talking about delegating everything. So that whole delegated authority. And again, we spoke in another podcast about the different stages of our journey that we were in. We were also caught up and swept up in the new thing, which was delegated authority. And I'm sure you can remember when we were part of that. What can we give foster carers? What decisions can they make? Can they make some? Should they make some? How does this work? And so...
But that was an interesting space on that, bringing it into school, and I suppose this is interesting when... Because what we're talking about, what we always talk about is changing systems, like creating new ideas, thinking of solutions. Like, so you can create all of these concepts, but actually when you implement them, there is always challenge with anything like that. So the delegated authority, for example, I remember the two things that I saw with it was, so if I was to put it into a school context, it gave foster carers, from what I remember, and I'm happy for this to be wrong, but like, decision-making power for school.
Can they go on the trip?
Haircuts, stuff like that.
Right.
And what happened was, I remember sort of talking to, it was like people within the fostering network at the time, that two things happened. Social workers were fearful of delegating authority to foster carers because if something went wrong, in inverted brackets, they're still responsible for that. And then the foster carers, the social workers that were then, let's just say, brave enough to delegate authority, some foster carers were unwilling or didn't want to make those decisions because basically then if something went wrong, they would be responsible. And it kind of like created this other problem of this kind of like risk-averse space. Now, I'm not saying that happened with everybody, but like that's also what happened in that space. Yeah. Like it was this kind of... And obviously some of the great things that came from that was that, we didn't have to get a DBS, which was called the CRB check at the time, to then go and have an overnight stay with somewhere. Foster carers could decide that, which was great because if you've seen your mates at school...
wait 2 weeks for a haircut.
Yeah.
Because your social worker was off, so you had to absolutely wait. That was the only person that could say yes or no.
Yeah.
Going back to education and, your campaign.
I'm still interested. Are you on board with the campaign?
No, I'm not.
Just to confirm, I think, before we move on, can I just say this one thing? With any campaign, I think it needs deep consultation. So please, can we consult about my idea?
Consult further about it. But I just think in terms of, look, the system as we know it might not look as though it's working or it works. And I think sometimes we fall into that trap of forgetting what it did look like. And you started off by asking me, what have I done and where have I come from and what has my educational journey been as a professional, but equally what has my personal journey been? And so I have been fortunate enough to see that where it was then, yesterday is not where it is today. And so I get that the system still needs changing for everyone in it. But sometimes every time we change this part, it then means we have to change that part. And we've never got enough time. And this is the problem sometimes with outcomes for looked after children. We've never got time to just go, let's see if this works for a minute. This seems really beneficial before we start going, no, that's not working. Let's change it all again. And people start getting quite fed up of that because it might not be looking like it's working on a majority, but on some smaller scales with smaller groups of young people, it works brilliantly well. And sometimes that's the problem with education and social work policy changes, that they're national and they're not localised. Because what works for this group of young people at this brilliant school that's trauma-informed, that's aware, they don't need all of that. And when you change that, it changes the brilliant things they can do. Whereas for these other schools that maybe aren't trauma-informed and maybe don't understand and don't have this or their social work teams or whatever it might be.
So let's talk about that. Let's talk about national context. There's lots of conversations at the moment around how behaviour should be managed in schools. So there's this kind of dance between what I call Mrs. Trunchbull and Peter Pan. Mrs. Trunchbull being like, behaviour is unacceptable, child, and if you continue to behave this way, I'm going to lock you in that coffin with spikes. Whereas Peter Pan is just basically like, all behaviour is communication. Everything's really nice, so let's fly to Never Never Land and talk about your feelings. So there's two approaches, isn't there? There's the behaviourist approach and there's the nurture approach. And obviously there is lots of conversation coming from central government at the moment, from particular people representing, saying that like there is a behavioural approach that is needed in schools. Like, what's your view of the impact that that has for care experienced young people? And also, not just them, but the teachers that are then asked to fulfil quite, I would say, demonistic behavioural management systems. If I can say that, but I said it's too late right it's out.
Okay, look. My hesitance isn't because I don't agree or disagree with anything you've just said. My hesitance is because what works in some schools with the right people, it almost wouldn't matter, right? Because we could make this school completely trauma-informed, do everything possible, create this amazing environment, all these great policies, and it's not a behaviour policy, it's a relationship policy, and do all of that. But if the people in it don't believe it, it almost doesn't make a difference, right? And it might make some difference, but ultimately it doesn't. For me, it goes beyond that. Like, I went into social work at the time when social work was all about community level stuff. And so whilst we're placing more emphasis on schools to almost do that early help stuff and provide the food banks and provide the support before it escalates and try and manage quite difficult circumstances for families and children before, who might even be considered edge of care, right? Whilst schools are doing all of that, it's taken away from the other things that they could do. So it's difficult, right? Because on one hand, I get it. The schools could be doing more because they're there all the time. But equally, it's what more we can't just keep putting things on education. It needs to be done with thought and intent. And so this whole behaviour thing really, it just winds me up, if I'm honest, because...
So I saw a picture on X, as it's now called, and it was from a leading character who advises central government. Let's not mention any names. Let's not do that. Yeah. But yeah, I'm sure it doesn't. It's not. It's not hard to work out. And the image was kids. It was taken from high up down into an atrium, and the image was kids all lined up, silent in corridors, like just moving their way through the school to the class. That was it, and it was like celebrated. Look at how amazing this silent corridor is. Look at how disciplined these children are. They're walking from one class to another, and guess what? They're not talking to each other, and this is a great success. Like, what is that about? Where's childhood gone?
It's the easy route, and I know people will argue with this and say, no, in Karylle, it's not easy to actually get all children to be disciplined in that area. I mean, from adult to child, that's the easy option. It's to get kids to do what we want them to do.
The only time I've got no experience at all in like leading education or anything like that. My experience is teaching teachers. But the only time I've ever seen imagery like that is when I've watched films and I've seen archaic prison camps. Like, that is the only, that's my only other point of reference. And I think lots of other people's point of reference is the same. So, but you're saying people think it's the easy route.
No, I don't think they think. I think what I believe is having that as an option, when people go, let's just get kids to all line up and all do the same thing, is the adult easy thing to do, because building relationships with 30 individual children is so hard, right? Being individualized for 30 individual children takes too much time. We don't have the time for that. We can't possibly do that, right? It's too much. So it's easier almost to go, you all do this. And those that don't, we can cherry pick them and go, you out. Yeah. Because that's easier than us going.
So I learned a phrase on that, and it's called flattening the grass. I've never heard about it before, but there is a phrase now called flattening the grass, where a school has a change of leadership, or there is a change of something in that school, and what happens is someone comes in, or I don't know, someone comes in, something comes in, and they get rid of all the young people that essentially are like challenging, and that's called flattening the grass. And what it does is it really quickly just reduces all of the behavioural incidents, all of your exclusion rates because they flatten the grass. And I know I heard at the Navish conference when I was there is one of the policies that people were trying to put through in a campaign. I can't remember the campaign. I think it was something that Timpson was behind. It might have even been a Timpson review, was saying that if you exclude a child or expel a child from school, that their achievement follows, like that. What their success still sits in your school's reporting, and if they go off and they don't do very well, that's in your school's data because you were the people that let them go. I would love that. I mean,
doesn't it change how people do it? But look,
hold on to young people as well,
and to give I can't say I've never met, but to give educators a little bit of a.
Are we going in?
A grace here. To give them grace here, because actually the large majority of educators I've met in any space, be it primary, secondary or further education and higher education, absolutely are humans and want the best for all children and want to do that individual. But the policies that they're surrounded by don't allow for it. So they'd love to be, I'm sure if any of them are listening, would love to say, well, actually, Karylle and Luke, that's what we strive to. That's what we want to. That's what we're out there campaigning for. That's what we're striking for. But the policy just doesn't allow for us to do that. Instead, it says so many absences equals, so many things equals. And again, it goes back to it's so easy to not blame, I know that's not what we're doing, but focus on a particular group, and that being teachers in this respect, and say, you should do X, Y, and Z. But they don't create the education policies. They're not the ones doing that. And some of them don't even have an opportunity to change that. And so they're just working with what they're working with. And so, I just think behaviour is such a...
Well, I can... Sorry, I couldn't...
No, go.
No, behaviour is such a...
It's such a, I was going to say taboo, but it's like taboo in terms of you're taboo if you say it's all behaviour is communication, rather than if you say no, behaviour needs to be managed. People get celebrated for coming out with these big, let's manage children's behaviour and that will solve everything else. And they forget that children's behaviours are an output of all the inputs other adults are inputting into children. So why don't we spend time supporting and healing communities, supporting and treating families with more respect, making sure everyone's got access to the same things when they need them. And then we might see a difference in children's behaviour.
Yeah. Well, their behaviour is a consequence of their environment and their experience and what they've learned from adults. I mean, that we know that exists in the boring psychology, which is, when we couldn't do all the exciting stuff that we've talked about in previous podcasts. But
the experiments.
Just for context, if you're watching this.
And this is the only one
you need to listen to the other podcasts, because when we're talking about experiments on kids, we don't advocate for that.
No.
You need to just go listen to the other ones. It's all about context. I absolutely agree in that, it isn't one or the other. I also agree in teachers... their idea that they can't act because policy won't allow it. And I think there's a few things, and I also believe in actually, young people are responding to what they've been through. We know all of that. And there's a few kind of solutions that I think we need to think about. One is the language that we use about behaviourism or behaviourist schools, and also then these nurture schools with the nurture approach, is that actually I think you need a mixture of both. Because it's unhelpful. So the nurturists will say, the argument is, what? So when a kid tells me to F off, I should just accept it because they've been through trauma. Absolutely not. I do not think that should happen. Nor do I think you should excuse that behaviour, because that's unhelpful for that young person.
You can address it.
Yeah, you're saying I can see that you're in...
teach new ways of coping. And when children are stressed and swearing, you can teach an alternative response.
Yeah.
But punishing for the only response they know...
Yeah, so which is my second point, which is around... teachers' skills and then confidence. So language needs to change, I think, where it's kind of, no, it's not okay to be sworn at by a young person, but it's also not okay to punish without first looking into why, right? Or exploring why. So I can see that you're hurting, I can see you're upset, but swearing is not okay. So the second thing I think, which is the challenging of teachers not feeling that they can act because of policy, instead of changing behavioural management systems, I think we could give teachers the skills to do something before implementing it, which is kind of saying, well, let's just leave it there for now. Let's not get this scary systemic change out. let's just say, here are some really practical skills we're going to teach you to de-escalate, to engage with that young person, to try and understand what's going on for that young person, whilst at the same time highlighting the behaviour back to them. And there's actual tools that you can learn to do that. Now, that doesn't come up in teacher training. So what
I was taught, I can only speak for myself, how to manage challenging behaviour, but not how to promote positive behaviour, not how to, I don't know, how to re-engage or redirect behaviour that's considered challenging, because I've always argued that because there's not a lot of childlike behaviours that are challenging for me. I just see them as...
Which is such a great point.
Behaviour.
But that's such a great point, is it's around individual skill sets. So, like, one of the things is that when we say this young person's behaviour is challenging, I think that statement is factually incorrect, because
100%.
You and I can look at a situation, I could feel challenged, and like you said, there's not much behaviour you can't manage or deal with or support or work in, whatever word you want to use. Let's say a young person bursts in this room now, they start doing lots of stuff that is causing a disruption. I might be like, oh gosh, how do I deal with this? What do I have at hand? I've got my behavioural management policy, so I go bum, 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 because I'm feeling challenged.
Yeah.
Whereas you will respond to it completely differently. And for me, what is missing is this space where all of those tools and techniques and tricks, all that kind of thing, can be taught.
Yeah.
And that's I think a weak response. Well, I think it's a powerful response. I think we do it, but we do it weekly, as in not every week, but as in weekly. Is that we'll just send teachers on a course, which is a lot of the time dry training about how to deal with challenging behaviour, and then we just expect them to have the confidence to be able to do it, and they don't. So
they don't.
You know, I think that
I think it's the normalisation of behaviour, right? That we all can feel stressed, and we all can feel triggered, and we all are bringing something different to any space. And so I don't know what it is when it comes to adults with children sometimes that we just forget they're children, you know, and that every lesson needs to be taught today. And it's one of the things I'm learning just as a parent, that not every interaction with my children has to be a teaching moment. And that's so hard to come out of, you know, and whether you're a parent or a teacher, because the whole ethos is you have to teach them. And if you do that, what will happen in the future? And we're constantly, you know, telling 5-year-olds, but that will lead to that. And if you don't do that, that will lead to... When actually, if we just let them be in the moment sometimes and say, look, what just happened wasn't great, or let's talk about that, or how did it make you feel? What can we do next time, and how do we move forward from that? Rather than, if you don't do this now and nick this in the bud, it's going to cause, because we know that the outcome stuff is not guaranteed, right? It's not going to happen. I didn't do very well at school, but hey, my teachers would never know when I did brilliant things at uni, though. 3 times I went to uni, 3 times, you know, like I was in uni more than I was in school. And so this idea, and I think there's just a pressure, right, of education being the thing, the grades, the this, the that, and that's great and that's fine. But people and children should be first, right? Because I can achieve at any point. I don't have to do it right now.
So I'm going to pick up this metaphorical microphone and I'm just going to drop it, because I think that is a perfect way to end this podcast.
Oh, God, the cringe.
Hour. Yeah. Karylle, thank you for another great podcast.
Thank you.